A transatlantic, what's it like with just a stop or two? Is it different without ports? And is it right for you? Stay tuned as we explore that answer. Welcome back to My Travel Window, where we help you travel as far as you can while you can. Today we explore our first ever transatlantic cruise aboard the beautiful Enchanted Princess. We admit to being a bit nervous when we embarked on this trip. How would it be different? Would it be too rough? Would we get bored with so many sea days? The answers to these questions surprised us. So come along as we explore the 7 surprises of our first ever transatlantic crossing and my summary of the experience. Spoiler alert, we booked another transatlantic just 3 months later. Stay tuned to the end and we'll provide you a detail of the upcoming video that compares those 2 trips. Surprise number 1, the pricing. Compared with other cruises, transatlantic crossings are cheap. The cost for this 15-day cruise was $1,900 each, or about $127 a day. That's a balcony cabin, and it includes gratuities. When you calculate the cost, also factor in the fact that we were using this as transportation back to the US after a vacation in Europe. So it saved us the cost of an airfare. This makes the price even more appealing. The price I listed does not include Wi-Fi, specialty dining, or a drinks package. I did buy Wi-Fi for a couple of days, and Princess sells a specialty coffee package that worked out to make our morning cappuccinos a little over $2 each. But for the most part, this was the end of a land-based vacation. Except for the balcony, we were pretty thrifty on this trip. As you can see from this search I did today, transatlantic trips can often be less than $30 a day per person. Why so cheap? Most Atlantic crossings are repositioning cruises, which means this is the end of the season for one region and the ship is being moved to serve another. Typically, this will be one-time trips from the Caribbean to Europe in the spring and from Europe back to the Caribbean in the fall. A variety of things suppress the demand. School is in session. There'll be few, if any, port stops. The weather will generally be less conducive to outdoor activities, and the open waters of the Atlantic do not present the smoothest of sailing conditions. From a budget perspective, this is the bargain basement of cruising. Surprise number 2, the itinerary. At a normal ship speed of about 20 knots, a transatlantic crossing will take about 6 to 7 days. But more often than not, the cruise lines will sweeten the deal, extending the trip on at least one side, so that a more common length is 12 to 15 days. Our 15-day cruise included 5 terrific stops. Here's a montage of what we saw. Surprise number 3, the veteran cruisers. You might expect a trip like this to attract a different mix of passengers, but just how different came as a total shock to us. At dinner on the first night, we were seated at a table with a half dozen other people whom we've never met. The conversation naturally came around to how many times people had sailed. A solo traveler at the table revealed that he had done more than 50 sailings on Princess alone. This was probably more than the rest of the table put together. But when we proclaimed our astonishment, he waved it off with a gesture of his hand. "That's nothing," he said. "On most sailings, Princess seeks out 30 or so cruisers with the most sailings and invites them to a special reception. I'm almost always invited. But on this one, I wasn't even close." Now that we've done a double-digit number of trips, we generally seem to be out about the middle of the pack in terms of cruise experience when compared to other people we meet. But on this ship, we were definitely on the novice side of the ledger. Surprise number 4. Where are the kids? Yes, this cruise was 2 weeks long in the middle of the school year. Even so, we were shocked by the lack of children on this trip. The ship has a stated capacity of 3,660 passengers, and there were about 2,200 on board, so we were about 2/3 full. After our first evening show, the cruise director came on and gave some statistics about the passengers. He told us there were exactly 2 children on board. We would later see them. They were preschoolers in the same family. While I think this is an abnormally low number, the reality is that these trips are, without intending to be, almost exclusively adult-only trips. For us, this was a good thing. Surprise number 5, the ship Cadence. Let me explain what I mean by this. Most cruises have a mixture of port days and sea days, and they feel very different. Comparing to life back home, a port day is like a work day. The gangway will open and close at specified times, and you have to orient your day around that schedule. It may involve an alarm, and will certainly involve time-based planning. Sea days, on the other hand, are more like the weekend. People get up later, they stay up later, they have more relaxed agenda for the day, and generally if they go out for a fancy occasion, it'll be on one of these days. But what happens when you string 5 or 6 sea days in a row? This moves past the realm of the weekend and into full-on vacation, as you realize there's a lot of hours to fill. Movies might give way to books and games. I found a delightful routine of morning cappuccino and monkey bread delightful. Try it if you haven't. We also began to consider some of the other ship activities that formerly were crowded out by a lack of time. We even took a dance class or 2. We did make sure that there is not video of that dancing. Surprise number 6, the activities. Some cruisers are port people. My wife and I fit this description. Our favorite parts of the cruise are the opportunities to explore new and exciting locations. Others are ship people who treat the vessel itself as a destination resort. These folks relish sea days. My wife and I were apprehensive, but once we settled into the Transatlantic Cadence, we found we loved it. I was afraid I would be bored, but that never happened. I finished a Kindle book that had been on my queue for years. We had long lunches with another couple we met on the trip. My wife joined a knitters and natters group that met and worked on individual knitting and crochet projects while getting to know one another. And the ship did its part to keep everyone entertained. We found a half dozen activities of interest every day, from first-class shows to cooking demonstrations to contests to the aforementioned dance classes. The atrium on a Princess ship is designed to be like an Italian piazza or town square. And on a transatlantic, it shines in that role. Something was happening there almost every hour of the day, and it was wonderful to take a seat and just watch. Near the end, the crew did a talent show here. I have never laughed so hard on a cruise ship. Number 7, and finally, handling the unpredictable weather. Hurricane season in the Atlantic runs from June through November, but the likelihood of being in a hurricane is actually quite small. Eastbound trips in the spring may have rough weather, but it's not hot enough for hurricanes. Westbound trips like ours are in the midst of the season, but they follow a northerly route because they're repositioning to be used for fall color trips along the eastern seaboard and into Canada. Hurricanes almost always fizzle out long before they reach the cities like New York or Boston. Westbound trips that travel farther south are relocating for the Caribbean winter season and will be passing through the area after hurricane season has passed. But you knew that word was coming, didn't you? The Atlantic is a big expanse. On this trip, we ran into the aftermath of a pair of back-to-back hurricanes. Leaving Ponta Delgada, Portugal, our captain took us south to the 33rd parallel, level with Bermuda, so we could let the remains of the storm pass by and come in behind it. We had one bumpy section for a few hours one day as we jogged a bit to alter course. The captain called these the roly-polies, but he did a good job of keeping us in reasonably good water. A few of us had to resort to some bonine pills and sea bands. I know of no one who lost their lunch, but there was a touch of queasiness. By sailing further south, we had to alter our itinerary. It originally called for us to sail into Boston, then south to New York City. Instead, we sailed north into New York City, arriving a day early. So we wound up exchanging a Boston port day for a New York one. Some were disappointed, we were not. By contrast, our second crossing was in a larger ship and was 3 months later, well outside the hurricane season. But seas were rougher overall and for a longer period. The roughness was enough that we missed both the stop in Ponta Delgada and Bermuda. Again, none of us became ill, but walking in the buffet line on the top deck was a little adventurous at times. Bottom line, we were nervous about this trip, but we loved it. If I could calculate a fun quotient, i.e. the amount of fun per cruise dollar spent, I'm sure this trip would rank at the top of all the trips we've ever taken. But as most of you know, there are no guarantees in cruising, and there are perhaps more uncertainties in transatlantic trips than most others. On cruise ships overall, we've missed ports or tours because of bad weather, labor strikes, political unrest, changes in government regulation, rock slides, and of course a pandemic. But for veteran cruisers willing to deal with that uncertainty, the rewards can be very great. That's why this is where so many veterans choose to spend their cruise dollars. As I said at the beginning, we booked another transatlantic trip 3 months after this one. Some experiences were the same. Others were very different. Next time, I'll contrast the two and let you in on another series of lessons learned. Until then, safe travels. So it saved us the flight of which means this is the end of the season for one region. Do not present the smoothness of sailors. We would later see them. They were preschools. But he did a good job of keeping us in reasonably good water. By sailing further south, we had to alter our itinerary. By sailing further south, we had to alter our itinerary. It originally... Let's try this one more time. But next time, I'll contrast the true... Blah, 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 blah.